Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Across Africa, our weekly look at stories and issues from across the continent. I'm Georja Calvin-Smith, and this week we look at how over the last few months Nigeria suffered a surge in school kidnappings. And I'm joined by Emmy Award-winning director Joel Kachi Benson about his film Mothers of Chibok, and to talk about his subjects' determination to be role models for their remaining children almost 12 years since their daughters were kidnapped. The violation of their communities faded from international awareness, but he wants to see the continent spend more time with its own stories. So, in January, schools in Niger State in Nigeria started reopening after one of the worst school abductions in the country to date. 250 students and staff taken in Papiri in the west of the country in November. Now, altogether, more than 1,500 children have been taken from schools in Nigeria since 2014, a tactic that is used by armed gangs. But in 2014, that's when it became an internationally notorious tactic, when 276 girls were abducted by Boko Haram extremists in the northeast of Nigeria in Chibok. Around 91 of those girls are still missing. Now, Joel Kachi Benson is an Emmy Award-winning Nigerian filmmaker who's made 2 documentaries about the aftermath of that kidnapping. First, Daughters of Chibok, and then Mothers of Chibok. Thank you so much for coming in to speak to me. Now, we've kind of couched this within the international attention that's once again turned to Nigeria's issue with insecurity. But one of the things that you really emphasized when you spoke earlier was that for you, it's really important that Africans take the lead in telling stories like this in order to make sense of what's often very sensationalized. What does that mean for you, and how is that translated into how you've chosen to tell the story of what's happened in Chibok?
I mean, at the end of the day, sometimes these things, when we hear them on the news, it's data, it's statistics, 250 children, 276 girls, 1,500. And because we don't put names, most of the time, it's just data, and then the next news comes on. And what we've tried to do with this film, is to humanize this and show the impact on families, because this is about families, is about women, is about, communities, right? But beyond that is, so how are they moving on from this? And in the case of Chibok, I've spent the last 7 years with the mothers in Chibok, and I've, seen a side to them that doesn't often get seen, right? This is the courage and the pride and the dignity that they have in moving on in the face of terror, and how they quietly fight back, right? Boko Haram means Western education is forbidden, right? But these women haven't stopped sending their kids to school in spite of everything that is happening or that has happened. And that's not a side that we see. And so taking control of that narrative and saying, as a Nigerian filmmaker, as someone from that part of, from Nigeria, from that part of Africa, I have a responsibility to portray a truer picture, if I want to use that phrase, of what's going on, addressing the challenge, but also highlighting the resilience and the courage and the strength of my people.
So so on one hand, you're saying that you're focusing on the dignity, the resilience. Tell us more about what's on the other side of that. When you see kind of a traditional approach to storytelling about what's happening on the continent, what is it that you think you'd like to see pared back? What is it that you're telling a story in contrast to?
Well, I mean, you use the word sensationalizing, and that's oftentimes that's what gets shown, right? And framing, when you look at Chibok again, for instance, right? The frame is always through this lens of tragedy and grief and pain, and that is correct, right? But that's not the complete, picture. There are other sides to these people. There are other sides to these mothers. There are other sides to these women. And if we don't show that, then we reduce it to just victimhood. And I don't think that's fair to the people. I don't think it dignifies them. We all have our fair share of challenges, and we acknowledge them. But I'm not going to sit down and say, oh, look, this is all that this place is about, and they're frozen in time, just waiting. They are moving on with dignity, with pride, right? They are fighting. I keep saying that they are fighting back. Because when someone says to you, don't send your child to school, if you do, I will kidnap, and you insist on sending that child to school, you're fighting back quietly, but you are fighting back. And that, I think that's worth acknowledging.
One of the things that struck me from what I saw of the film is that I haven't heard it framed like this, but I mean, it felt like actually quite a feminist piece. You know, there's one of the mothers who was like, the men do nothing, we're the ones who have to hold everything together. And there was a very clear, intentional, conscious, ownership of their role in keeping things going. She was like, the men play cards all day, we're the ones who make things happen.
Right.
Is that something from the time that you spent with the women themselves that struck you as being part of their outlook as they tried to keep not just themselves, their families, but their entire communities moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think that Chibok is such a beautiful example of a matriarchal society. And that's kind of like, at odds with what the perception that, people might have about, Africa and places in Africa where it's almost seen as patriarchal. But you have a community like this where the women really are the glue of that community. They are the glue of their families. They hold forts, they take care of the kids. They bear the brunt, the biggest burden, of the tragedy, but they're also the ones who hold things together, and hold themselves together. You can see that there's a strong sense of community amongst the women. And that was so impressive for me to see. I mean, I was raised by a very strong woman. She wasn't very educated, but all she had to give us was love. And so when I met the women of Chibok, they reminded me so much of her, and I feel like these are the women that you ordinarily don't get to celebrate. They're the unseen ones. And I hope that my film plays its part in really amplifying their voices and celebrating them and really showing the world who they truly are. You see the complete picture, and then you can take what you want to take out of that.
Now, your work is also really focused on making more factual films about Africa from the African perspective.
Yeah.
Do you think that there's enough institutional support for that from the continent, that the importance of that is a priority for, be it governments, be it kind of industry leaders when it comes to film and the creative sector? Or do you feel you're really trying to push against a system that doesn't really, that doesn't value what your vision is currently?
Yeah, I would say that, yeah, it's tough being a documentary filmmaker anywhere in the world, but it's much tougher in Nigeria and I think in many parts of Africa, because, everyone is always thinking about what's the commercial upside. And with making factual films, a lot of times it's just about the impact, right? And so,
So what do you mean the impact?
Well, I mean, I make my films because I'm trying to say something. I'm trying to shift perception. I'm trying to make a difference in the community that I'm working with, right? I'm trying to amplify voices. And so it's not about box office hits. But you have to use money to make that film. So for the investor, the question is, so what's my return on investment, right? And so unless you're fortunate to meet people who understand the value of impact and whose metrics for success is not, in dollars and cents, then it's gonna be really tough. And in a place like Nigeria, factual filmmaking or factual filmmakers are having a tough time. That's the honest truth. I'm here in France, we're at FIPADOC yesterday, or the last few days, and I showed my film there. I came with a team of young filmmakers from here, who were supported by, the French embassy, to come here and come and do this, right? And so I think that it's important, for institutions. There should be more institutional support in Nigeria and other parts of Africa for factual filmmakers, because when the world tries to see Africa for what Africa truly is, factual films have a very important role to play. And we can't keep saying that, we want to shift perceptions. We want to show ourselves for who we truly are, and then we don't support the art form that makes that possible. It's a contradiction. So I hope, that we can get more support from within the continent as opposed to looking outside to get the support, because that also has its own fair share of challenges. But,
And do you feel that even with these constraints that you've made an impact, that you've made a difference?
I'm not sure if I'm the guy to say I'm making a difference, but I'm doing my part. I hope that, I'm doing my part to amplify voices. I hope that I'm doing my part to inspire young filmmakers in Nigeria, to go out there and tell the stories that matter to them. I say it with pride that, the awards that we've won and the places that we've shown, we've done that from Nigeria, and I think that I hope that it inspires a young filmmaker out there to know that, look, you can still be in Mushin or in Yaba or in Surulere, or in Joburg or in Accra and make a difference and make a film, tell a story that the world will stop and watch, So I hope I'm playing my part.
And finally, you say that you're not the person to ask, but in your conversations with that community in Chibok, you stuck with them for much longer than many working in the media have.
Yeah.
You have personal relationships with them. Do you feel that they appreciate the time that you've spent together? Has that, in your opinion, helped them move forward and with their work of trying to heal?
I think so. I think that my relationship with the mothers in Chibok has transcended filmmaker and character. I think right now it's just, we're like family. We're doing the best that we can. We keep supporting them beyond the film. For me, it's beyond the film. It's about how can we keep supporting you to keep fighting back, to keep educating your kids. And you'd have to ask them.
Thank you so much, Joel Kachi Benson, for coming in and speaking to me about some of the work that's gone into making that second film focusing on the Chibok community, Mothers of Chibok.
Thank you.
And that's also all we have time for Across Africa. Thanks very much for joining us, and do so again if you can. Till then, take care.